Japan 1960s were the peak years of the Japanese New Movement, which began in the 1950s and continued through the early 1970s. In this movement, the artists rejected traditions and conventions of classical Japanese cinema in favor of more challenging works. Coming to the fore in a time of national social change and unrest, the films made in this wave dealt with taboo subject matters including sexual violence, radicalism, youth culture, and Korean discrimination and the aftermath of World War II. They also adopted more unorthodox and experimental approaches to composition, editing, and narrative. The Shaw brothers from Hong Kong, who formed the Tianyi Film Company, inaugurated a new generation of more intense, less fantastical wuxia films with glossier production values, acrobatic movements, and stronger violence. This marked the crucial turn of the industry from a female centric genre system to an action movie orientation. The martial arts subgenre of kung fu movie exploded into popularity internationally, with the Shaw brothers driving and dominating the wave. In 1970s, the Shaw brothers landed contracts with rising young performers who had fresh ideas for this industry, like Bruce Lee and the Hui brothers, and allowed them greater creative latitude than was traditional. During the Golden Harvest, the Big Boss, also known as the Fists of Fury in 1971, came into theaters. This jump started Lee's career into stardom and made martial arts and kung fu a global trend. By the end of 1970s, Golden Harvest was the top studio, signing in with Jackie Chan and kung fu comedy actor filmmaker who would spend the next 20 years as Asia's biggest box office draw. Lee played a key role in opening foreign markets to Hong Kong films. Lee's, Lee's films enjoyed throughout the third world cinema were often taken as a symbolizing the rebellious pride of insurgent Asia. While Japan and Hong Kong saw immense success in their film industries, the Chinese cinema, on the other hand, suffered greatly due to the Cultural Revolution. The film industry was severely restricted, coming almost to a standstill from 1967 to 1972. It was only after the end of the Cultural Revolution that the Chinese cinema flourished with movies like the scar dramas of 1980s such as Evening Rain and Hibiscus Town, depicting the emotional traumas left by the period. The 1980s saw the decline of the major Japanese film studios and the associated chains of cinema. But while this was taking place, anime rose into popularity, with new animated movies released every summer and winter, often based upon popular anime television series. Mamoru Oshii released his landmark Angel's Egg in 1985. By the early 1980s, the popularity of home video made film watching widespread activity for the Taiwanese. In contrast to the melodrama and kung fu action films of the earlier decades, new Taiwanese cinema are also known for their realistic, down to earth, and sympathetic portrayals of Taiwanese life. These films sought to portray genuine stories of people living either in urban or rural Taiwan and are often compared stylistically to the films of Italian neorealism movement. In the 1980s, the South Korean government began to relax censorships and control of the film industry. The motion pictures of 1984 allowed independent filmmakers to begin producing films. Meanwhile, South Korean films began reaching international audiences for the first time in a significant way. Director Im Kwon-taek's Mandela in 1981 won the Grand Prix at 1981 Hawaii Film Festival, and he soon became the first Korean director in years to have his films screened at European film festivals. And in 1988, the South Korean government lifted all restrictions on foreign films, and American film companies began to set up offices in South Korea. The 1980s and early 1990s had proved to be a successful decade for Hong Kong. The cinema had now a greater technical polish and a more sophisticated visual slapstick comedy, sex, the supernatural, and above all, action ruled. occasionally all in the same time. One iconic film during this period was The Killer in 1989 by John Woo, which is an archetypal of the heroic bloodshed genre. The 1990s proved to be a transition phase for the East Asian cinema into modern cinema. Several new anime directors rose to widespread recognition, bringing with them notions of anime not only entertainment but modern art. Mamoru Oshii released internationally acclaimed philosophical science fiction action film Ghost in the Shell in 1996. Satoshi Kon directed the award-winning psychological thriller Perfect Blue. Several horror films like Cairo, Dark Water, Ojin, the Grudge series, and One Missed Call met with commercial success. In anime, Hayao Miyazaki directed Spirited Away in 2001, breaking Japanese box office records and winning several awards, including the Academy Award for the Best Animated Feature in 2003. The post 1919 period saw the rise of Sixth Generation and post Sixth Generation. Movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dungeon, and Hero gained international attention. The new Taiwanese cinema gradually gave way to what could be informally called as a second new wave, which are slightly less serious and more amenable to the populace, although just as committed to the portraying of Taiwanese perspective. For example, Tsai Ming-liang's Viva l'Amour, which won the Golden Lion at 1994 Venice Film Festival, portrays the isolation, despair, and love of young adults living in an upscale apartments of Taipei. Ang Lee is perhaps the most well-known second new wave director. His early films, Pushing Hands in 1991 and The Wedding Banquet 1993, focused on generational and cultural conflicts confronting many modern families. His Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon 2000 revived the wuxia genre successfully. Taiwanese cinema faced difficult times competing with Hollywood blockbuster in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Taiwan's film industry went into decline in 1994 and collapsed in 1997 because of the growing popularity of movie piracy. In 2008, Cape Number 7, directed by Wei Ting-sheng, was a huge box office success. It is currently the highest-grossing Taiwanese domestic films of all time. It won 15 awards to date, such as the Outstanding Taiwanese Film of the Year. The record-breaking achievement led to the revival of Taiwanese cinema. Hong Kong film industry, on the other hand, underwent a drastic decline during the 1990s, from which it has not yet recovered. South Korean cinema saw a domestic box office success exceeding that of Hollywood films in the late 1990s, largely due to screen quota laws that limited the public showing foreign films. One of such blockbusters was Kang Jae-kyu's Shiri in 1999, a film about a North Korean spy in Seoul. It was the first film in South Korean history to sell more than 2 million tickets in Seoul alone. Shiri was followed by another blockbuster including Park Chan-wook's Joint Security Area in 2000 and Kwak Chae-young's My Sassy Girl in 2001. Director Bong Joon-ho's The Host in 2006 and the later the English language film Snowpiercer in 2013 are among the highest grossing films of all time in South Korea and are praised by foreign film critics. Yoon Sang-ho's Train to Busan in 2016 was also one of the highest grossing films in South Korea and became the second highest grossing film in Hong Kong in 2016.